That's great. Thanks, Alison. Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the cross-party group on towns and town centres. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today online. I actually can't see from where I'm sitting how many of you are here, but I do know that there was quite a few that had RSVP'd. Can I just ask everybody, please keep their microphones on mute? And it's quite a heavy agenda for an hour. So we're going to go through all the guest speakers and leave questions for the end. If you'd like to ask a question, if you could please put it in the comments box and we'll try to get around to everybody's question. And if your question is to any specific speaker, if you could specifically highlight that also in your question in the comments box. For those that don't know me and we're not at the last meeting, my name's Siobhan Brown and I'm the MSP for Eyre Prestwick and Troon. I think we're today also joined by fellow MSPs, Fiona Hislop, Sharon Dowie, Paul McClelland and Paul Sweeney. As MSPs, we're familiar with today's topic of the community wealth building. This afternoon, we'll be discussing the principle of community wealth building in our towns. So with no further ado, I think I will pass over to Phil Prentice. Thank you.
Thanks, convener, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be very brief today because I think it's important we hear from the experts that we've invited in to talk about community wealth building. But this is really an opportunity, a time that we can do things differently. We've seen a massive period of disruption with the pandemic, and we're facing a challenge around net zero. But it really is a time for opportunity. If you take a look at what's been emerging from Scottish Government over the last 6-9 months or so, we've got a new national strategy for economic transformation. How do we build back an economy that actually works for the majority of people rather than just the few? We've got a new national planning framework that's really focused around driving net zero and climate action. So again, I think we need to be very positive and embrace these opportunities moving forward. That said, we've also got the Town Centre Action Plan, a refreshed version, which was based on a new future for Scotland's towns. How do we rebalance the inequities within the retail sector and online? How do we drive towards, again, net zero, climate, inclusion, community wealth building, and all of the things that the review group actually asked to see happen. I can't remember any point in time when there was so much political focus on town and city centres. And aligned with that, huge amount of resource, whether it's through Scottish Government's Place-Based Investment Fund, Vacant and Derelict Land Fund, the Levelling Up Fund from the UK Government. There's a huge amount of investment and it's multi-year consistent funding for the next few years. So when you look at all of this, we've got a massive opportunity. But I'm going to hand back to the convener who will introduce our speakers because it's important to see just how community wealth and a fairer society can be delivered at this point in time.
Thank you, Phil. Apologies, and it's totally my fault, but I have gone from agenda item 1 straight to agenda item 3. So I will need to go back to agenda item 2, which were just the minutes of the last meeting. I know that they were circulated yesterday, and I was hoping that we could accept them. If anybody has any dissent or problems with the minutes that were circulated, if they could please put something in the chat box. Otherwise, we will just accept the minutes from the last meeting in December. And I don't think anything's going in the chat box, so the minutes are accepted. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 4. And can I introduce Neil McEnroy, who's a fellow for Democracy, Collaborative and Community Wealth Building Advisor to the Scottish Government. Welcome, Neil. Would you like to take over? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Thanks, Phil, and delighted to be here this afternoon. Alison's going to share some slides with me. So yes, as the convener said, I'm 3 days a week work in the USA for the Democracy Collaborative. Are based in Washington, and we're advancing community wealth building in a number of locations across the United States, including Chicago, towns and rural Pennsylvania, Oakland, and California. So that's 3 days a week, and in fact, Democracy Collaborative were the inventors, if you like, of community wealth building way back about 15, 20 years ago in Cleveland in Ohio. So that's 3 days a week. 2 days a week, I'm with the Scottish Government in the Local Economic Delivery Division of the Economic Development Directorate. So I'll just get going. I thought I'd start with a wee quote, really. Next slide, please, Alison. This is the great Jane Jacobs, who wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities. The intricate minglings of different uses in cities or let's say towns, are not a form of chaos. They're contrary. They represent a complex and highly developed form of order. And what Jane was talking about was about basically about relationships, not transactions. This is about how do we make sure for vibrant towns that we actually have this intricate minglings. In a sense, what we're talking about here is how does the commercial economy, the social economy, and the public economy work effectively together? And in Scotland, Team Scotland, if you like, and how does it all fit together to create a vibrant, effervescent, well-being Scotland that everyone deserves? And interesting, I've just out of a meeting this morning with Business Services Association, Westminster Arthur, who's the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth. And again, that was very much about how they could play a role in terms of this intricate minglings with public, in that context, public and the social economy and their role within that. Next one, please, Alison. So community wealth building in towns. What happens in towns and town centres is actually reflective of the wider economic transformation we require. We are a land of towns, a nation of towns and small places as much as the big cities. So what happens there is fundamental to our economic transformation. And what we're talking about here is we need to have a full system view, not just tinker around the edges, but change the operations of the economic system, the public, social and commercial elements. We can think of it another way, that towns are almost like canaries in the mine of an economic model. When we see failing, that's a canary telling us, hold on here, there's something going wrong. We need to actually listen to that canary and think something's going wrong with our economy, right, as much as the towns. Now, towns have been awfully transactional. It's where you buy stuff and get stuff. Yeah, it needs to be more relational. It's about life. Yeah, it's about, the word economy means keeper of the household in Greek, economos, keeper of the household. It's something that we can construct. It's relational to our lives. We just don't fit into the economy. We can create it any way we want. And that is fundamental about how we need to think about community wealth building and what happens in towns. And too much wealth that we create, us industrious people, scooshes away. It's extracted, yeah, elsewhere. And there is poor local multipliers. Multipliers, those economic things, you know, fundamental things where, you know, you spend £1 and where does it go? Yeah, you own the land and who benefits from the land? It's this multiplier effect is kind of poorly thought through, arguably. Now, in this, hitherto, there is flaws in our economic development. Get the growth and it'll be all right. Well, it isn't all right for many. You know, we need to think harder about growth, and community wealth building is a correction. It's a deep resetting of how we think about economic development in Scotland. And also, what community wealth building says, there's kind of flaws in traditional redistributive regeneration. Let's get the growth and then we'll redistribute it. Yeah, we'll just regenerate. We'll use some of that surplus to hand out to places, to do things in places. Now, that's good. We need redistribution. But what community wealth building about pre-distribution? How do we hot wire inclusion and social and environmental justice into the actual economy as it works before and during economic activity? Not just waiting for growth, making sure that more Scots have a stake actually in the economy and economic production. And in that, ownership is clearly key. Next one, please, Alison. Another way of thinking about this is that what we're talking about here in terms of wealth, and wealth is the defining feature of all economies. Who has it? Where does it go? How do more people get their hands on it? And wealth, we need to think about wealth as like a flow, like our lot of water that we have in Scotland. Where does it flow to and who gets it? Where are the burns and streams and lochs and reservoirs? Where are the tributaries? And how does it reside in places where we can capture it and use it for all Scots, the benefits of Scots? So it's about flows, not trickle down, torrent down, with reservoirs in place we can capture that wealth. That's the essence, if you like, of what community wealth building is about, but it's a deeply practical approach. Next one, please, Alison. And in that practice, you'll hear from Vary and Emma once I shut up. Another way to think about community wealth building is economic plumbing. What are the pipes that actually makes sure that the wealth that we create is directed to nourish our towns and also our people and our communities? What is the piping? And we could say in economic development, as I am, economic developers, we should be economic plumbers, thinking about how we actually create a ecosystem so that wealth is truly directed to where it should be. And in this thinking about plumbing, next one, please, Alison. We've got these 5 pillars as part of the model: finance, plumbing, workforce plumbing, spending, land and property, and inclusive ownership. I won't go into detail here, but basically what they are is all bits of the plumbing system that we seek to redirect: finance, credit unions, banking, Scottish National Investment Bank, what we do with our pension funds, workforce, the fair work agenda, spending, procurement, how do we spend our own resources in Scotland, our own public money, land and property, who owns it, who benefits from it, and of course, inclusive ownership. By that I mean the great cities, the great towns of the world see a plurality of ownership. The big companies for sure, small SMEs, social enterprises, cooperatives, mutuals, community interest companies, community involved sector, that plurality actually helps to retain that wealth, not distant shareholders, people that in those places actually own some of that economic activity. Next one, please, Alison. In Scotland, what we're doing, and we've been, we're moving up and muscling up. It's a mean to practically deliver on Scotland's wellbeing, inclusive growth aspirations. And there's 4 things that's going to happen. One is policy. A lot of our work in the Scottish Government is basically making the connections between our economic development activity, our local economy delivery, with a range of other policy areas that's relevant to this. Say public health and their spending, or the police and their spending, or local government and what they're doing. So it's a linking this policy horizontal policy conversation. Like there's practice, and you'll hear from Emma and Vary in a moment. We've made quite significant progress in several pilot areas now in Scotland. There's 5 of them that were chosen for various reasons. They were Clackmannanshire, South of Scotland, Western Isles, Tay Cities, Fife, and Glasgow City region, and also North Ayrshire were earlier on this journey, and they are now well advanced, and they produced their annual report just before Christmas there in terms of 1 year on their community wealth building journey. There's also other areas now cooking on with community wealth building, including though South Lanarkshire, West Lothian, and Dundee, but there's a number of other areas now that are accelerating community wealth building strategies, plans, and actions. And in the programme for government, we are part of the COVID recovery plan. We're looking to advance community wealth building strategies and plans for all 32 Scottish local authority areas. There's been a lot of work done in movement building across the public, social, and commercial sectors, building the ethos, if you like, of community wealth building. And then finally, last but not least, of course, there's the probable legislation later on this parliamentary term where we will solidify an additive piece of legislation that will hopefully potentially clear some of the blocks, help to amplify some of the early successes in a community wealth building act. And we're now just planning for that in terms of consultation and so forth. That's all from me. I hope that was useful, and I'll hopefully hear from you later on. Well, back to you, Kavina, or we'll plough straight into
That's fine. Thanks very much, Neil. Much appreciated. We'll move on to the next agenda item, and it's going to be a pilot case study for North Ayrshire Council. And can I introduce Mary Patterson, please?
Thanks, convener. Bear with me a wee second, and I will share my slides. Okay, great. Thank you all very much for having me here today. I'm Vary Patterson, Community Wealth Building Coordinator at North Ayrshire Council, and thank you, Neil, for giving that very inspirational introduction to community wealth building. So what I'm going to do today, just provide a bit of context in terms of North Ayrshire Council's approach to community wealth building, a bit about our background on that, and then also a little bit more about how we create thriving towns through community wealth building and some examples of what we're doing on the ground here. So our community wealth building strategy was launched in May 2020, and it really demonstrates our commitment to the principles of community wealth building and aspirations for a fairer and more inclusive local economy. We have a community wealth building mission to enhance our local wealth, the creation of fair jobs, maximising the potential of all our places through working in partnership with our communities and businesses. It's the first community wealth building strategy in Scotland. It's a long-term strategy and works across all of our services and with our anchor partners, local businesses and local communities. To support this, we've invested in a number of temporary staff and it's been taken forward across key teams, including economic policy, business support, communities, regeneration, employability, skills, procurement and HR. We have 55 strategy actions within that action plan and aligned to all the community wealth building pillars, so all 5 pillars that Neil mentioned. So that's procurement, fair employment, land and assets, financial power and plural ownership. We also have an investment fund which we utilise to accelerate economic recovery of the area and tackle wider regeneration at the same time as tackling the climate change agenda as well. So just to take you on a little bit more about how we are approaching supporting our towns through community wealth building. We know that our towns are facing new and unprecedented challenges associated with evolving retail patterns. To address this and ensure that our towns are thriving and creative, enterprising and accessible places, we're committed to taking a place-based locality approach to supporting these places. And by doing this, we're taking the principles of community wealth building as a driver, and we can support our towns in various ways. Now, as Neil said, community wealth building is about that holistic approach, looking at all the various ways that the economy is fed, that money flows into the economy, flows out of the economy, and looking at recalibrating that. We need to support our towns and communities become vibrant and resilient, and that's more than just about the physical regeneration projects that take place in there. It's also about the wider support for economic development through growth and the diversity of our local business base, so those plural forms of ownership that Neil was talking about. It's about opening up procurement opportunities for those businesses to take advantage of, as well as investing locally in community enterprises and projects as well. So to create these thriving towns, we need to work across the various community wealth building pillars. So key pillars that we've focused on in our community wealth building strategy that are relevant to towns include land and assets. And in doing so, some of the actions that we'll do to support this, looking at reviewing the priority of vacant and derelict land sites and buildings, improving commercial estate and the council assets through our investment fund that I mentioned before. We also want to review the environment and develop proposals for supporting town centre living. Other things we can do in relation to procurement, keep it local campaigns. We want to support our town centres and local businesses, particularly in times of economic recovery and a couple of years that have just come through. We want to develop a proactive procurement approach to support and grow local suppliers. Delivering support to our communities directly through community benefits and community benefit wish lists. In relation to plural ownership and financial power, we have business locality officers proactively supporting local businesses, including financial support for plural ownership models. They're empowering town-based community projects through the Community Investment Fund and looking at what their aspirations are. And something that we've been doing recently is exploring the feasibility of looking at and establishing a repair network, a repair economy in North Ayrshire, building upon existing community and business-led activities. And this is something that would really strengthen those types of activities already going on in our town centres. So So just to take you on to some of the projects that are underway in North Ayrshire, but I want to remind you of the fact that this is within a bigger context. It's not just about physical regeneration activities. We have our 2021 to 2026 regeneration delivery plan that aligns very closely with our community wealth building strategy. It outlines the priorities for maximising the use of our land and assets, the strategic regeneration of sites and places. But locality partnerships are key community partners in placemaking and the regeneration that we have taken place in line with community wealth building, and it seeks to support the local enterprises and business activity and contribute to net zero carbon targets. So like I say, this is all within a bigger context and more than just about the physical sites themselves. So some key examples of how community wealth building is supporting the development of our towns include the restoration of Millport Town Hall on the Isle of Bray. This has been supported by North Coast and Cumbrae's locality partnership, and the Millport Town Hall charity were successful in receiving funding from our council's community investment fund and Scottish Government Regeneration Capital Grant Fund. So work is on way there to create a community hub and event space. We also have Stevenson Beach Hub, another community hub which will have a cafe, workshop space, classroom, event space, and also showcase the town's natural heritage being right on the beachfront. It was supported by the Scottish Government Town Centre Fund, again the Community Investment Fund, and the Scottish Government Regeneration Capital Grant Fund as well. And it's hoped that the beachfront will be completed by the end of summer, I believe. We've also got the Future Skills Hub based in Kilwinning. So this is part of Ayrshire College larger Kilwinning campus, and it's a good example of our anchor partners working together. So North Ayrshire Council provided land via asset transfer to the college to help with the siting and the orientation of building. And the hub's going to deliver courses on engineering, construction, smart technologies, as well as house and apprenticeship programme. So again, this is also feeding into wider aspects of creating fair employment routes, ensuring that we've got skills in the local area, investing in those skills, and supporting our employers to create apprenticeships for local people as well. Another key element of community wealth building, which is embedded within our approach, is maximising the use of the land and assets that we have, including land or property which is vacant or derelict. Our town centre living pilot is a good example of repurposing property, seeking to investigate the potential of town centre living. So we have a couple of proposals being developed. There's two sites in Irvine, pictured there is 36 Bank Street and the King's Arms, which is a former pub, just along from Bridgegate council offices. And we also have another example in Howgate in Kilwinning. We also have recently taken forward called our Repurposing Property Grant Fund. Now this fund, the aim of this is to support landowners and community groups to bring back vacant land and properties into more productive use. We recognise that there's various barriers to potentially doing that. So stage one of the grant looks to support with feasibility studies to identify potential site options and their viability. So stage one of that fund is worth £200,000, and future stages of the fund will be determined by the outcomes of the stage one. Applications are assessed against a range of factors, including the length of time that the site has been vacant, whether it's on the vacant and derelict land register or the buildings at risk register, and their proximity to town centres. There was a great deal of interest in this fund during the expressions of interest stage, and applications at the moment are ongoing and are going to close in a couple of weeks. But we anticipate a lot of interest in that, and we're keen to support landowners and communities where possible. So these are just kind of some examples of activity that's going on the ground at the moment in North Ayrshire. But like I say, supporting our towns and our town centres is a holistic approach. It involves looking at community wealth building in the round and not just in isolation, specifically about physical regeneration projects. It's much more about that bigger recognition of where the flows of money and employment is going in and out of our town centres. So thanks very much for listening. I'll be happy to answer any questions later.
Thanks very much, Mary. Appreciate that. A lot of work being going on at North Ayrshire that we're all aware of. Can I move on now to agenda item number 6 and the case study from Fife Council? And I've got Emma Fifey, please.
Hello there. Hi, I'm actually from Maximising Council. Thanks.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Last minute change, I know.
That's okay. Thank you very much. So hello everybody, I'm Emma Fivey and I am Senior Manager for Development at Maximising Council. And I manage 4 service areas. Those are planning and building standards, economic development, sustainability, energy and climate change, and also environmental health. So being a planner by trade, I've been working on trying to improve towns and town centres for many years. And I think safe to say community wealth building is a relatively new concept for me, but I'm now making the links for how community wealth building can be linked to this kind of traditionally land use planning type of work. So Clacks Council has been fortunate enough to work with Neil and the Scottish Government colleagues to prepare a community wealth building action plan, looking at how we can embed community wealth building into everything that we do. And that's quite wide ranging and covers a huge amount of areas. But today I'm going to concentrate on what this means for our towns. So next slide, please. So when I was preparing for today and thinking about what community wealth building means for towns, I immediately thought about the place principle. And Clacks Council has a really good track record of using and delivering on the place principle. And I'll show you a couple of examples in a minute. So what is the place principle? And I'm sure most people on this call are familiar with what it is, but I'll just give you a reminder. It's a collaborative approach which requires all those responsible for providing services and looking after assets in a place to work and plan together and with communities to improve the lives of people, support inclusive growth and create more successful places. So safe to say, implementing the place principle generally does result in high quality outcomes for our towns. However, I think if we take this a bit further and also view this process through a community wealth building lens and look for opportunities to apply the 5 pillars of community wealth building shown on the slide, I think we can further improve on those outcomes. And at Clacks Council, that's exactly what we've been doing. So next slide, please. So now on to some examples. This is a really old map of our largest town, Alloa. It was once a bustling industrial town with an active harbour. Weaving, glassmaking, and its world famous brewing and distilling meant that jobs were plentiful. So whilst we still see some remnants of those industries remaining today, they're much reduced. And the harbour today is no longer open, and the decline of traditional industries has led to the economy relying more on retail and services. And like many other areas, housing and supermarkets have been built on former industrial sites. Both Alloa and the wider Clackmannanshire area now has a low jobs density and a high number of workless households. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this SIMD indicators map of Clackmannanshire's main settlements, we have high rates of deprivation, with some areas, particularly in Alloa, south and east, being in the most deprived 10% in Scotland. A quarter of children here are living in poverty, and there are clear health, education and wider economic inequalities. So the council's clear that new approaches are needed to try and improve the lives of these residents. And working with the Scottish Government, we're adopting a wellbeing economy approach, recognising that wellbeing indicators are just as important as traditional GDP measures when it comes to measuring success of a place. And we see community wealth building as a key tool to help us delivering on wellbeing economy aspirations. So the council's committed to its next local outcome improvement plan being a wellbeing economy one, and community wealth building will be embedded into its action plan. And the council has also recently been successful in Alloa becoming one of the 4 towns selected to be part of Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme. So this is a Public Health Scotland and Improvement Service-led programme, which will take a look at health inequalities in Alloa and look at how these can be improved on over time using a set of place and wellbeing outcomes. So we're at the start of this programme and really looking forward to seeing what benefits it can bring to our more deprived areas. So next slide, please. So I'll now move on to examples of where community wealth building and the place principle has been implemented in our towns. To the south of Alloa, just by the river and close to those areas of multiple deprivation I've just shown you, there's an area called Forth Bank, so it's down at the very bottom of this slide. It's got a big recycling facility and a large area of council-owned vacant land, and the council has been working with its partners, including Stirling University and the energy sector, to look at proposals for locating a large-scale solar farm and commercial food growing facility there. The potential to harness geothermal energy is also being investigated. The lettering in red, which you probably can't see, apologies, it just shows key public buildings. So there's Alloa Academy to the south, primary school, nursery, community centre in the middle, and then up to the north there's the council's headquarters and Alloa's Forth Valley College campus. So what we want to do is create a heat network linking the public buildings and looking at the potential to expand the network to provide low-cost energy to our most deprived housing areas. The food growing project is innovative, and it uses enclosed food growing towers where any climate can be created and therefore any food can be grown. So I think this would be a really good project in itself, but what we're looking to do is turn the community wealth building dial and bring community food growing models in here too, where the community can take on ownership and where low cost food can be provided to families living in poverty. So next slide, please. We really see at Clackmannanshire the Forth Bank community wealth as a community wealth building opportunity site based around implementing the place principle. So it'll make socially productive use of publicly owned land. It'll help us realise our transition to net zero. It'll give our communities opportunities to become involved in and take ownership of food growing cooperatives. And it'll also provide low cost energy and food to those who need it most. Next slide, please. So now on to my second example. This is a screenshot of a former public toilet building owned by the council, but closed some years ago. You might wonder why on earth I'm showing you this, but it's because of what its next use will be. In 2018, a place standard exercise was run by our Alloa First Business Improvement District and our third sector umbrella organisation and the council. And this led to an approach called Living Alloa being developed. So a first stage action plan for improving the town centre. And it focused on 5 project themes. So arriving, living, learning, connecting and socialising. So when the Scottish Government announced its town centre regeneration fund around about the same time, we were in a really good position to put funding to good use. In this project, it's the Alloa Hub, focuses specifically on the arriving part of the Alloa Living project. And the hub will support strategic aims, including improving fitness of existing and new residents, reducing social isolation and highlighting heritage offer and boosting the wider generation of the area. Next slide, please. So this is what the new Alloa Hub will look like. I think it's a vast improvement. I think you'll agree. The Alloa Hub, it will be run by a new charitable organisation set up specifically for this purpose, but including the Business Improvement District and Third Sector. It'll offer a range of services, including an active travel hub, a bike workshop, flexible space for hiring out to local groups, local tourist information point, as well as a shop selling locally made goods. It'll have bike and walking groups running from it for locals and tourists. And will also include a large changing places, disabled toilet and shower for cyclists. So this alone is a really good achievement, I think. The council was using its surplus property and Scottish Government funding to create this community hub to lease to a non-profit third sector organisation to improve the lives of communities. However, the community wealth building dial has been turned again, this time by the council's partners. And a community benefit society is being set up to operate the Alloa Hub. And from today, hot off the press, local residents and businesses are being invited to purchase shares in it. So by purchasing shares, local people can have a direct involvement in helping with the running costs of the hub and a say in how it operates in the future. Next slide, please. The last example I've got, it relates to the small town of Alva at the foot of the Ochil Hills, which is a population of about 4,800, so quite small. Its industrial heritage was in textiles, but as with Alloa, the textile mills have closed and it's now a service centre and commuter town. Architecture and Design Scotland and Scottish Futures Trust worked closely with the people of Alva and the council to develop a vision for a safe and thriving town centre. And the project takes a kind of whole place collaborative approach to understand what change is needed. So whilst it covered most of the town, the work also focused on a former mill site called Glentana on the edge of the town centre shown on the map. On this council-owned site, a derelict mill building faces onto the main road. You can see it there in the photograph. And a large area of parking sits behind, facing onto public park. And a previous council decision had confirmed that this was going to be a purely affordable housing site. Next slide, please. Again, the place standard was used here to identify local needs and perceptions of the current physical and social characteristics of the place. And then Architecture and Design Scotland worked closely with council officers, health professionals, teachers, members of the community, school pupils, to test findings from the consultation and to identify and map existing assets and priorities for the town, including aspirations for the Glentana Mill site. As a third stage, Architecture and Design Scotland worked on a vision and priority actions with council officers. So scenarios from the point of view of different members of the public were created as well to ensure that the vision and actions reflected what different generations and types of people would typically need from the town. So it looked at it from different angles. And then also, in addition to this, there was 3 potential scenarios for the regeneration of Glentana Mill. They were also defined. So the next slide, please. So what started out as a kind of one affordable housing site, it grew arms and legs, and it became a whole town vision with the community's needs and priorities made really clear. So not only will this help the local community prepare and finalise a local place plan under new planning legislation that's coming, but the process also provided us with some options for taking the Glentana Mill site forward and making it beyond a kind of purely housing site. All the scenarios that we got included housing in some form, but the stakeholder sessions highlighted other uses that were needed and that could be located on the site. An example is, it became clear from the stakeholder meetings where the current health centre is struggling for space, and it might benefit from some form of additional consulting space elsewhere in the town. And that's just to accommodate the changing nature of primary healthcare delivery. So facilities for both young and old also came through strongly as being needed, as did providing facilities for visitors to the town who want to climb the Ochils, and also take advantage of our excellent off-road active travel network. The potential for small business units is also being explored, as is the relocation of the local library to this site. So in essence, significant value to the process was added by taking this kind of whole place collaborative approach. We've listened to the community and we'll pursue a mix of uses on the site to deliver something that works far better for them than simply a housing site would have done. So we'll shortly be taking the options on to the next stage with community and stakeholders. Funding is clearly important here, and so those stakeholders will need to bring their budgets to the table to put together a viable development brief. But the work, however, I think this work, safe to say, does give us a solid platform to align our plans with different funding streams that will soon be available, such as the City Region deal. So I hope you found these examples interesting. I think combining the community wealth building principles with a place-based approach to our town can really, kind of a whole systems approach, can really add value and deliver what communities need and not what the council and others thinks it needs. I think that the council is doing really good work around this area. It's difficult for us sometimes being a small council with limited resources, but our committed officers are ensure that we as a council are really punching above our weight in embedding community wealth building in our towns. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Emma. Much appreciated. And thank you for all the contributions from Neil, Barry and Emma. I think there's lots of great innovative work going on in these pilot projects. I know that the slideshows will be emailed to everybody who's in attendance today. And if anybody has any questions, if they could put it in the chat. If I could ask before bringing in MSP colleagues, and this is probably a question for you, Neil. How can non-pilot areas get involved in the community wealth building journey?
It's a good question, Convener, thank you. Well, there already is a number that are doing it anyway on their own too, on their own back really. So without direct Scottish Government support, albeit support that's sort of encouraging, but no financial support or direct support. So they can get on and do. We're putting together, assembling sort of a series of materials that would help with that, so guides and so forth inside the Scottish Government, with partners at EDAS, Economic Development Association Scotland. As we move forward, though, I think we're hopeful that there'll be more support, a deeper support, if you like, moving forward. As we move past the consultation into more of the legislative process, I think there'll be hope that there'll be more an ecosystem of support that can help councils. Also, other anchor organisations as well, including health boards, community planning partnerships, universities, and so forth, to help them all play a role in this movement we're all building. I would say one thing though, is that this is not traditional type regen where it's like a budget attached to it, a big budget attached to it. This is about bending what we've got and making what we've got work more effectively. And lessons from elsewhere around the world means that this is not just new money. This is not that. This is actually trying to bend the way we actually function and the culture of how we do things, which is very much in line with the DFM's sort of agenda as well, in terms of how we're moving forward with our public sector resources.
Thank you, Neil. I am aware that in the Esher Growth Deal, there has been £3 million committed specifically for community wealth building throughout the 3 Eshers as well. So I was going to bring in some of my MSP colleagues. I think we've got Sharon Dowie on the call. Would you like to come in, Sharon? I'm not sure if Sharon's there. Fiona Hislop, are you there? Would you like to ask any questions?
Yeah, very interesting presentations. I suppose I was struck by Neil's slide that talked about this being about relationships, and the presentations were quite focused on property and buildings. And I'd be interested from Mary and Emma as to what has changed in the relationships in your areas that's helped deliver change, as opposed to good community development consultation. Because I'm sure you're doing it, but I was just wondering what it's like in your areas. So maybe, Mary, do you want to speak first, and then Emma?
Thanks. Yeah, I think one of the key things that's changed is about breaking down traditional silos and establishing much closer working relationships internally, but also with our partners. So internally, we've got our teams, so for example, procurement and business support and development teams working much closer together. We've got a dedicated role to help facilitate that, called a procurement development manager, to help bring those teams closer together. So that's looking at helping support our local businesses to grow, to develop, to submit tenders, increase their successes in those areas, and look at also what's coming forward in our own procurement wave plans and match that up to what local businesses can do to be successful in those tenders. So that's kind of one example, but there's other about working regionally better. So the convener mentioned the Ayrshire Growth Deal, community wealth building project, which the 3 Ayrshire local authorities are working together on. And that's a 3-year deal. Will support local businesses. Also looks to develop a Fair Work Ayrshire service. So local employers, get them to develop fair work principles and embed those in their organisations as well. We have also have a community wealth building commission in Ayrshire, led by North Ayrshire Council, and again that facilitates that regional working across our anchor partners, and looks to facilitate new ways of working together, thinking collaboratively together, changing our ways, and helping one another to do that. So those are the kind of things that are going on behind the scenes, if you like, in order to support these projects that are being taken forward.
And thanks very much. Emma, what would you say about the relationships aspect of the community wealth building that's been taking place in your area?
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Barry says about relationships across the council improving. I think we've all for many years become siloed in the way we work, and I think across the council. It helps being a small council as well, but real communication across the council has improved with procurement colleagues across all different professional areas. I think one recent development that we've had is our anchor partnership being formed. So that's part of our community planning partnership, and it has representatives from the private sector, which is great to get them on board, our education sector, NHS. So that kind of communication between those kind of anchor partners with real power in the local area, real spending power in the local area, we're getting together and we're going to start, thinking about, okay, how do we deliver on this? How do we make a real difference? I think the relationships element to me really is so important. I think Neil touched on it earlier, is about that embedding the culture in different organisations. So embedding it in the council's culture is a real task to start with. So I think that's really important, and rolling that out and it becoming a way that people think, and it becomes second nature and everything that we do. So a lot of activity going on in Clarks. I think we're a bit behind where North Ayrshire is, but where we are definitely making progress. And I think the anchor partnership will be key to those kind of building those relationships with lots of different sectors and working together to deliver on this.
And thanks very much. I'm on the Economy Committee, so before I hand back to Siobhan, I'll do the advert that the Economy Committee is about to start its town centre inquiry. So I know there'll be a lot of people that will be interested in that, but thanks very much for that, Siobhan.
Thanks, Fiona. I just want to bring, I think Sharon Dowie's here. Did you want to ask a question, Sharon? I think we've also been joined by Neil Bibby, MSP. Neil, are you there? Would you like to ask a question? I think what I'll do is I'll just move on to a few questions that we've got in the chat. Graham Finley, what mechanisms can be used to persuade those who previously or currently receive the wealth to redirect it back to the local area? And who are those parties who should be approached? And I'll just also mention Declan's one, because this is about the private sector, and we'll move to maybe Phil and Neil on these ones. I'm in Ireland, and there is certainly a greater awareness of town centres. First, my work takes me around the towns and villages of Ireland. I see a lot of towns very quiet with lots of shops and services closed down, same as here in Scotland. Every time I see a little or some large supermarket opening up on the edge of our cities, I wonder how many more small shops will close to these towns and villages. Where do we start in Ireland to lift the towns and villages? If I could bring in Neil for those, and then Phil, could we come to you, please?
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that question initially, Graham. I think there's two main things to think about here. One is around the public sector contracting and the conditionality that's placed on that. So how those large contractors then have conditions around community benefits. There's also, I think, soft encouragement of how they could see themselves as relational within the economy themselves, and how they develop the supply chain, the Scottish supply chain particularly, and how we create different forms of ownership models within that supply chain. And even just today, speaking to the Business Services Association, there's a number of organisations there that are very much about not just community benefits from those public sector contracts, but also see it as upon their duty within Scotland to actually enhance a Scottish supply, not just for economic reasons, of course, but also for wider resilience and security reasons as well, that's so pertinent at the moment. So that's one element. I think the other element needs to be done is we need to make sure there is a Scottish business base that is fit to compete and win contracts, and that is where Supply Development Scotland and a whole range of business support is so essential. I mean, my personal view is that Scotland could do a lot more in terms of building up that effervescence, if you like, to compete and win a range of contracts and other elements within the commercial economy. And I think they've got huge opportunities to do more in that area. In terms of Ireland, interest in Ireland is now a little bit on the community wealth building journey. But what I would say is that there is something here about progressive planning, and obviously the national planning MPF4 is important to this, and clearly that is also under the auspice of Mr. Arthur, and thinking through how do we make sure that planning is embedded with community wealth building, and we see considerations made to not just the direct impact of getting a new superstore or supermarket or whatever out of town shopping, but actually see what the wider relational aspects of that might be, and how we can plan accordingly for more diversity and plurality within our economy. I mean, other nations have different forms of stipulations about size of out of town and so forth, social enterprise zones and other things that encourage different forms of commercial activity. So I hope that kind of partly answers the questions that were given. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Phil, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I would echo what Neil says about system change, and the examples that we've heard today is very interesting in terms of sort of first principles, looking at this quite radically, embedding all the key sector stakeholders, partners. This isn't going to happen overnight. This is changing an extractive economic model that's been built up for the last 50 or 60 years. But as long as we start to unpick that and head in the right direction, I would say that aside from public procurement, which is a big lever for Scottish Government, public policy as well. And I have to say I'm quite heartened to look at the economic transformation strategy. I like a lot of what's proposed in MPF4. And the drive here, mainly around net zero, is going to have to change, and the post-COVID environment is going to change how we live, work, be educated, and that, to be honest, the smarter private sector guys have already cottoned on to that, and they are looking at deploying institutional investment into town centre living at a scale that we haven't seen before. So those conversations are already underway, making use of existing asset base instead of sprawling out into fields, which is unsustainable. So I think the private sector are willing to engage, and the public sector's role in that is to facilitate and to work with those positive guys moving forward. In terms of Ireland, we've been doing a lot of work with the Irish government. For the first time, they've actually embedded Town Centre First principle into their programme for government. That was an ask from the Greens and Coalition. They are delivering a lot of collaborative town centre health checks. Ireland has a wee bit of an advantage in that it didn't go down that clone town route that we had in Scotland, where every town more or less looked the same, developer-led. You got a WH Smith, a Weatherspoons, you know, they all looked and felt very, very similar. Ireland still kept a lot of their sort of small family independent businesses, and it didn't have the same scale of national or multiples that we had in Scotland. But aside that, they still need to do a lot more work, particularly around property ownership and community wealth, as Neil has pointed out. But at least they're starting to give it the focus that's required, and there's a real political interest. And to put it in context, Ireland has been so driven by the Dublin economy that they took their eyes off towns completely. I mean, we could fit our 7 cities into Greater Dublin. That gives you the scale of the Dublin economy and how big a driver it is to the Irish economy. But I've been heartened of late by the number of institutions and bodies and politicians that are now looking at the town's piece. And COVID has actually consolidated a lot of that. So people are moving to the west, they're moving out of Dublin where the property prices are extremely high. They're settling their families in places like Sligo. So the towns are getting a bit of a bounce back and a renaissance from the pandemic. And also it'll be beneficial in terms of net zero and some of the investments that they're planning to do. So I would look to Ireland as catching up, and we're partnering with them and helping them in whatever way we can. And I would also look glass half full in terms of engaging private sector in this agenda moving forward.
Thanks very much, Phil. I think we all know that, like our town centres previously, we're the heart and soul of our communities, and we've got to do everything we can to build them back to the new way that we're going to be in our new world. If I can thank Neil, Emma and Vari and Phil for all your really valuable contributions today, it's greatly appreciated. And thank everybody that's joined us online. Just to let you know, the next meeting will be taking place on Wednesday, the 8th of June at the same time between 12:45 to 1:45. So thanks very much, everybody. Take care.
Thanks again.